Ellie Harper was only 6 years old, yet the hospital room felt too big for someone so small. Pale walls, humming machines, and the faint smell of disinfectant wrapped around her like a cold blanket. She lay quietly on the bed, clutching her stuffed rabbit, trying to be brave the way her dad always told her. He had just left for a late shift, promising to return before sunrise. Ellie believed him. She always did. But tonight, someone else stepped through the door. Janice Miller, Ellie's stepmother, entered with a bright smile that never seemed to reach her eyes. In her hand, she carried a small paper bag from the hospital cafe. "Sweetheart," she said softly, "I brought you something to help you feel better." From the bag, she lifted a shiny red apple, polished so perfectly it reflected the bedside lamp. Ellie didn't know why her stomach twisted. Maybe because Janice rarely visited unless her dad was watching. Maybe because the smile felt too sweet. Still, Ellie nodded politely. She had been taught to be kind, even when she was afraid. What Ellie couldn't see was the hallway outside. Officer Daniel Brooks, who happened to be at the hospital for a routine safety check, walked past the pediatric wing with his canine partner, Shadow. The dog suddenly stopped. His ears shot up, nose pointed directly toward Ellie's room. A low rumble vibrated in his chest. Daniel frowned. Shadow never reacted like that without a reason. Inside the room, Janice slowly lifted the apple toward Ellie, voice soft as silk. "Go on, sweetheart, just one bite." Shadow barked sharply. Janice's hand froze. And Daniel, startled by his partner's sudden alarm, rushed toward the doorway, just as the apple slipped from Janice's fingers. Before the hospital, before the apple, Ellie Harper had always been the kind of child who tried to make life easier for everyone else. She colored little notes for her dad and taped them to his lunchbox so he wouldn't forget to smile. She folded her own clothes, even though she mixed up socks and shirts. And ever since her mother passed away 3 years earlier, Ellie believed it was her job to stay strong so her dad wouldn't feel alone. Their small home in Dover didn't have much, just a worn-out couch, a flickering porch light, and the faint smell of engine oil from her dad's work clothes. But it was warm, safe, familiar. Everything changed the day Janice moved in. At first, Ellie tried her best to like her. She offered Janice drawings, helped set the dinner table, even tried calling her Miss Janice, the way her dad encouraged. But Janice always looked at Ellie as though she were a shadow blocking the sun. Her compliments were thin, her patience even thinner. When Ellie accidentally spilled juice on the counter, Janice hissed, "Your father spoils you too much." When Ellie asked for a bedtime story, Janice replied, "6-year-olds don't need coddling." Still, Ellie never complained. She believed grown-ups were supposed to know more, feel more, love more. But there were moments she wished she could tell her dad everything, like how Janice's smile disappeared whenever the two were alone, or how she would lock her bedroom door at night because Janice's footsteps always slowed outside her room. Ellie convinced herself it was normal. Adults were complicated, her teacher once said. Then Ellie got sick. It started with a fever that wouldn't break. Her dad left work early twice, then 3 times, until his supervisor warned him about his hours. That was when Janice offered to help. She volunteered to watch Ellie, to take her to appointments, to stay overnight at the hospital so her dad could keep his job. And Ellie, exhausted from coughing and dizziness, didn't argue. She wanted to believe Janice finally cared. But that night in the hospital, the night of the apple, Ellie sensed something different. Janice wasn't nervous about Ellie's fever. She was nervous about something else entirely. Ellie felt it in the way Janice hovered too close, in the strange sweetness of her voice, in the way she kept checking the hallway. And Ellie's quiet fear only grew stronger when she realized Janice had locked the door behind them. The hospital room where Ellie lay sick was small, soft-lit, and quiet. Nothing like the places Janice preferred to be. Janice Sutton had come from a world of manicured nails, loud brunch tables, and polished marble floors. Before marrying Ellie's father, she spent weekends sipping champagne in hotel lounges and posting photos from rooftop restaurants in Philadelphia. Even now, she kept her designer purse perched on the hospital chair as if afraid the room might stain it. To Ellie, though, all of it felt distant. Her world was the worn teddy bear on her blanket, the humming IV pump, and the comforting memory of her dad's rough hands adjusting her pillow before he rushed to his late shift. This room, though frightening, felt safer than the house she now shared with Janice, a house where silence grew heavier every day. Janice paced the small space like it was beneath her, glancing repeatedly at the hallway window. She'd already fluffed her hair 3 times and checked her reflection on her phone screen as if she were preparing for an audience. Ellie watched quietly, not understanding why someone visiting a sick child would look more anxious about being seen than about the child herself. Meanwhile, down the corridor, Officer Daniel Brooks was finishing paperwork after responding to a minor incident in another wing. His K-9 partner, Shadow, trotted calmly beside him, nails tapping softly on the linoleum floor. The hospital staff greeted Daniel politely. He was known for being steady, kind, and almost impossibly perceptive. Shadow, however, was the one who usually sensed trouble first. Back inside Ellie's room, Janice finally stopped pacing. She placed her purse on the tray table with a soft thud, then drew out the same small paper bag she had brought earlier. She held it delicately, like a gift meant to impress. "Ellie," she said with a sweetness too smooth to be real, "I brought you something special, something just for you." The bag rustled. Janice's fingers tightened around its edge. Ellie shifted uneasily, clutching her stuffed rabbit closer. Janice leaned in, her voice a whisper. "It'll help you feel better, trust me." At that exact moment, out in the hallway, Shadow froze again. Ears forward, muscles tight, his nose locking onto the scent drifting from Ellie's room. Daniel felt the pull on the leash, and he knew instantly something was wrong. Janice's fingers curled around the paper bag as if it held her entire future. Her smile stayed painted on, but her eyes, cold, sharp, jittery, told a different story. Ellie sensed it instantly. Even at 6 years old, she had learned to read Janice the way children read weather. Quietly, instinctively, and with a fear they don't fully understand. "Sit up a little, sweetheart," Janice murmured. Ellie obeyed. She always obeyed. Her small hands trembled as she pushed herself against the pillows. Janice pulled out the shiny red apple again, turning it slowly as if admiring it. But something was wrong. Her thumb hovered over one small dent in the skin, so small Ellie wouldn't have noticed if Janice hadn't lingered there. Janice wasn't admiring the apple. She was checking it. Her breathing changed too, becoming shallow and hurried, like she was waiting for something to finally fall into place. Ellie swallowed, confusion twisting into dread. In the hallway, Shadow tugged harder on the leash. Daniel frowned and followed quietly. The deeper they moved into the pediatric wing, the more agitated the dog became. This wasn't his usual alert for spilled medicine or cleaning chemicals. This was different, urgent. Back inside the room, Janice crouched to Ellie's eye level. "You know," she began softly, "your father works so hard. He has so much to worry about." She brushed Ellie's hair off her forehead with a touch that felt too gentle, too rehearsed. "Sometimes, people like us have to make things easier for him." Ellie didn't understand. "People like us?" Janice's smile stretched wider, brittle at the edges. "Yes, the ones who don't want to be burdens." The word hit Ellie like a cold hand around her chest. "I'm not a burden," she whispered. But Janice's expression snapped, sharp, impatient, tinged with something darker. "Everyone is something, Ellie, and some people—" She lifted the apple inches from Ellie's mouth. "Are easier to handle than others." Ellie stiffened. Her heart fluttered like a bird trapped in a cage. And just as Janice guided the apple closer, Shadow erupted into a furious bark from the hallway, so loud it made the window vibrate. Janice froze. Ellie gasped. And Daniel Brooks reached for the doorknob, sensing that he was about to walk into something far worse than he expected. The moment Daniel pushed the door open, time seemed to stretch into something slow and heavy. Janice jerked upright, hiding the apple behind her back so quickly it almost slipped from her grasp. Ellie shrank against her pillows, eyes wide and watery, unsure whether she was being saved or thrown into even deeper trouble. "Ma'am," Daniel said calmly, though his instincts were already screaming, "is everything all right in here?" Shadow growled, not loud but low and continuous, staring directly at Janice's hand. Daniel followed his partner's gaze. Janice stiffened, her smile faltering. "Oh, officer," she said, voice airy and trembling. "Of course everything's fine. I was just giving Ellie a snack." She held up the apple slowly, trying to make the motion casual. But even that small gesture felt rehearsed, unnatural, like someone acting a part they had never practiced enough. Daniel stepped closer. Shadow's growl deepened. Ellie reached out with one hand, barely touching Daniel's sleeve. "She locked the door," she whispered, voice thin with fear. Janice spun around, her face draining of color. "Ellie, don't make up stories like that. You know how your imagination gets." But Daniel had already noticed the sliding lock positioned inward, the kind that only someone inside the room could engage. "Ma'am," he said, "I need you to hand me the apple." Janice hesitated, her jaw tightened, her fingers curled tighter around the fruit, knuckles whitening. "I don't see why this is necessary," she snapped, the sweetness in her voice evaporating. "It's just an apple." Shadow barked sharply. Ellie flinched. Daniel reached out his hand again. "Ma'am, now." Then it happened. The slip. Janice stepped back too quickly, bumping the tray table. The apple flew from her grip, clattering across the floor before rolling straight to Shadow's paws. The dog sniffed once, then recoiled violently, barking an alarm so sharp that 2 nurses rushed to the doorway. Everyone in the hallway heard it. Everyone stopped. And for the first time, Janice realized her perfect image, the one she polished and guarded, was cracking in front of witnesses. "What's in that apple?" Daniel demanded, his voice no longer calm but edged with steel. It's nothing. This is ridiculous," Janice shouted, but her voice shook. People were gathering now, nurses, a doctor, a security guard. Eyes were turning toward her, whispers were starting, and Ellie, clutching her rabbit, whispered one trembling sentence that cut through the noise like glass. She said I was a burden. Every head turned to Janice, and the room fell silent. For several seconds, no one in the room moved. The air felt tight, stretched thin between Ellie's trembling words and the stunned silence that followed. Janice's face drained to an ashy gray, her mouth opening and closing without sound. Daniel didn't look away from her, not once. He had seen guilt before, the kind that crawled beneath a person's skin, and he saw it now, flickering in Janice's eyes. A doctor stepped forward. "Officer Brooks, is the child in danger?" Daniel didn't answer immediately. Instead, he crouched beside Shadow, whose rigid stance made everything unmistakably clear. The apple wasn't harmless. "Shadow doesn't react this way unless there's a chemical present," he said. "We need the floor secured and the child evaluated immediately." Whispers rippled through the growing crowd. Janice snapped back into motion. "Stop! You're blowing this out of proportion! It was just fruit! Dogs bark at anything!" But her voice was too shrill, too desperate. Daniel rose to full height. "Ma'am, you need to step away from the child." Janice backed up, her heels scraping against the tile. "I was helping her. I stayed with her while her father, She faltered, realizing the excuse sounded thin. She tried again. "Ellie is confused, sick. She doesn't know what she's saying." Ellie lifted her chin, small, shaking, but brave. "I'm not confused." Janice froze, and Ellie continued, her voice steadier this time. "You told me people like me make things harder, and you didn't want me to be a problem anymore." Gasps filled the doorway. A nurse murmured, "Oh my God." Something inside Janice snapped. She lunged toward Ellie, not violently, but with a speed that made Daniel surge forward instinctively. Shadow barked, stepping between them instantly, his teeth bared in a warning that needed no translation. Janice halted inches from the dog's jaws, trembling. "This is all lies! She's lying!" Daniel's voice cut in, sharper than steel. "Then why did you lock the door?" For the first time, true panic flashed in Janice's eyes. And that was it. The sentence that flipped the entire room against her, the sentence she could not argue, could not charm her way out of, could not twist into something innocent. Because everyone saw it, everyone knew it, and Janice realized, too late, that her carefully crafted world had just collapsed. The hallway outside Ellie's room had transformed into a storm of urgent voices, shuffling feet and controlled chaos. Doctors moved quickly to check Ellie's vitals. Nurses escorted witnesses out, but amid the noise, one image remained frozen. Janice standing alone, cornered by truth, by fear, and by the eyes of every person who had just seen her unravel. Daniel kept his position between Janice and the child, Shadow sitting firmly at his side like a silent warning. When hospital security arrived, Daniel gave a simple nod. She locked the door, the child confirmed verbal intimidation, and Shadow detected a foreign chemical on the apple. His voice was steady, not triumphant, just certain. Janice backed up until her shoulders hit the wall. "You're ruining my life," she spat, though her voice shook violently. "I was trying to help. You don't understand how hard it's been, how much I've sacrificed." Daniel didn't flinch. "Whatever you've been through doesn't give you the right to endanger a child." Security moved in. Janice resisted for a moment, but it was weak, defeated. As they guided her down the hall, she cast one last frantic look at Ellie, as if expecting the child to save her. But Ellie simply clutched her stuffed rabbit and turned her face into the pillows. Janice's final words echoed back, sharp and shaking. "You'll regret this." But no one looked at her anymore. When the hallway cleared, Daniel stepped beside Ellie's bed. Her small hand reached for his without hesitation. "Am I safe now?" she whispered. The question nearly broke him. "Yes, sweetheart," Daniel said softly. "You're safe, and you're not a burden. Not to your dad, not to anyone." Ellie's eyes filled with quiet relief, the kind that comes from finally exhaling after holding your breath too long. Moments later, Ellie's father rushed in, breathless, eyes wide with panic, until Daniel explained what happened. The man's legs almost buckled as he knelt beside his daughter, pulling her into a trembling embrace. Ellie buried her face in his shoulder, and for the first time in weeks, she didn't look afraid. Justice continued its course swiftly. Police gathered evidence, the lab confirmed contamination on the apple, and Janice Miller was processed and charged. But for Ellie, the most important moment came later that night, when Daniel returned to check on her one last time. Shadow rested his head on the bed rail, tail thumping gently. Ellie smiled, small but genuine, and Daniel realized she finally believed she wasn't alone. The morning after Janice's arrest, the hospital felt strangely calmer, as if the building itself had taken a deep breath after a long night. Ellie slept peacefully for the first time in days, curled against her father's arm. Her fever had dropped, and the doctor assured him that with rest and monitoring, she would fully recover. But emotionally, the journey ahead would take longer. Officer Daniel Brooks stood just outside the door, finishing a quiet conversation with the hospital administrator. "We'll need full documentation," he said. "Security footage, witness statements, anything that helps clarify what happened." The administrator nodded, still shaken. "We've never had an incident like this. I can't believe she—" He stopped, unable to finish. No one wanted to imagine the worst possibility inside a children's ward. Downstairs, detectives interviewed staff who had interacted with Janice. One nurse remembered how anxious she seemed. Another recalled seeing Janice step into the restroom clutching the paper bag tightly. When detectives checked the trash bin, they found a small disposable object that raised even more suspicion. Nothing graphic, just enough to confirm that Janice had taken deliberate steps that night. Across town, news of the arrest spread quickly but quietly. Dover was a small community. People remembered faces, cars, even the way neighbors waved on weekends. The idea that a stepmother, one who always dressed neatly, spoke politely, and took photos at holiday events, could have endangered a child sent a chill through the town. Meanwhile, Ellie's father, Mark Harper, struggled to absorb everything. Guilt sat heavy on his shoulders. "I trusted her," he said quietly to Daniel. "I thought she cared. I thought, after losing my wife, maybe I was the one who needed help." Daniel shook his head gently. "You weren't wrong for hoping for good in people, but Janice made her own choices." Mark exhaled shakily. "I should have seen something." "You saw it last night," Daniel replied, "when it mattered." Inside the room, Ellie woke slowly. Her first question was soft. "Is she gone?" Mark nodded. "She won't hurt you again." Ellie relaxed into the pillows, eyes fluttering shut. But outside that peaceful moment, police were uncovering more. Financial documents from Janice's home office revealed hidden debts, overdue credit accounts, and unexplained withdrawals. The motive that had once seemed unthinkable suddenly became painfully clear. Daniel studied the paperwork with a hardening expression. This wasn't just a moment of cruelty. It was a plan. By the third day, Ellie had improved enough to sit up and color quietly, though her father rarely left her side. Mark tried to smile for her sake, but worry still clung to him like a shadow. He hadn't slept, barely eaten, and kept replaying every moment with Janice, every sign he missed, every uneasy glance Ellie had given him. Guilt, even misplaced, was a heavy thing. Officer Daniel returned that afternoon with Shadow for a wellness check. Ellie brightened when she saw them, patting the bed so Shadow could rest his chin beside her coloring book. Mark looked up gratefully. "She's only smiled like that for the two of you." Daniel nodded. "Shadow's got that effect on people." But peace never stayed long. A nurse approached with a small box. "We found this at the front desk," she said. "It was dropped off by someone who didn't leave a name. It's addressed to Ellie." Mark's brows pulled together. He opened the box and froze. Inside was a single, perfectly polished red apple. Ellie's breath hitched. Shadow shot to his feet with a sudden bark that startled the entire room. Daniel stepped forward instantly. "Don't touch it!" The nurse backed away, rattled. Mark's hands shook as he set the box down like it might shatter. "Who would bring this? She's in custody. How could—" Daniel didn't answer. His eyes had hardened, locked on the apple with the same tension Shadow showed. He carefully lifted the box and sealed it in an evidence bag. "Shadow doesn't react to fruit," he murmured. "There's something else going on here." Ellie's small voice piped up. "Is it bad again?" Daniel turned to her gently. "We don't know yet, but Shadow's keeping you safe, and he hasn't been wrong once." Ellie nodded, though fear flickered behind her eyes. Minutes later, security replayed camera footage. It wasn't Janice. She was still in police custody. Instead, a hooded figure had slipped into the lobby, dropped the box, and left in under 10 seconds. No clear face, no hesitation. Mark's voice cracked. "So she wasn't working alone?" Daniel's jaw tightened. The room felt colder now. "It means someone else knew what she was planning, and they're still out there." Shadow growled quietly, staring at the doorway as if expecting danger to walk right in. And for the first time, the threat around Ellie felt bigger than any of them had realized. The evidence lab at the Dover Police Department was silent except for the low hum of machines. Officer Daniel Brooks stood beside the glass partition, arms crossed, watching the technicians examine the second apple. Shadow sat at his heel, ears pricked, as if he understood exactly how important this moment was. Every few seconds, Daniel glanced at the digital clock on the wall. The waiting felt endless. Finally, the lead technician, a meticulous man named Dr. Keaton, stepped out holding a sealed report. "Officer Brooks, you need to see this." Daniel took the folder, flipping it open. His jaw tightened immediately. "Same as the first one?" Keaton nodded grimly. "Trace levels of a sedative. Not enough to harm an adult, but for a child that small—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. Daniel exhaled slowly. "Janice is still locked up, which means someone else prepared this." "Correct," Keaton said. "And this wasn't sloppily done. Whoever handled it knew what they were doing. Same chemical family. Same application pattern." Daniel's expression darkened. "So it's coordinated." Back at the hospital, Mark paced Ellie's room with agitation he couldn't hide. "How is this happening? I trusted her. I trusted the people around me, and now there's someone else. Someone who knew what Janice was doing?" Daniel entered with Shadow, his presence grounding the room. "We confirmed the apple was tampered with," he said gently, "but it matches the substance used in the first one. That means Janice didn't act alone." Ellie clutched her blanket. "Does that mean someone wants to hurt me?" Daniel kneeled beside her. "What it means is someone helped Janice, and we're going to find out who." Ellie blinked up at him, tears threatening. "Why me?" Mark's face crumpled. He sat beside her, pulling her close. "Sweetheart, this is not your fault. Not ever." Daniel's radio crackled. "Brooks," the dispatcher said, urgency in her tone. "We found something in Janice Miller's home office. You need to come in immediately." He exchanged a look with Mark. "Stay with Ellie. Shadow and I will be back soon." Shadow barked once, sharp and focused, as if confirming the mission. And as Daniel left the hospital, carrying the weight of the report in his hand, he knew one thing for certain. This wasn't just a desperate act. It was a plan years in the making, and the real danger was only beginning to surface. Daniel arrived at the station with Shadow trotting purposefully beside him. The moment he stepped inside, he sensed tension in the air. Detectives whispering, papers piled haphazardly, and a supervisor pacing near the briefing board. Something had shifted, and not in a good way. Lieutenant Harris motioned him into a small conference room. "Close the door, Brooks." Daniel obeyed, though unease crept into his chest. Shadow sat alert at his heel. Harris folded his arms. "We searched Janice Miller's home office, found financial documents, massive debt, overdue accounts, all hidden from her husband." Daniel nodded. "So motive is confirmed." Harris didn't respond immediately. Instead, he slid a thin envelope across the table. "Then we found this." Daniel opened it. Inside were printed emails, long chains between Janice and an unknown sender using an encrypted address. The messages were cold, clinical, discussing pressure, timing, and removing obstacles. "Who is this?" Daniel asked. "We don't know yet," Harris answered. "But here's the problem. Someone higher up wants us to drop it." Daniel froze. "Drop it?" Harris lowered his voice. "We received a call from a regional official. They said Janice's case is domestic and shouldn't be escalated into a conspiracy. They want everything wrapped up as if she acted alone." Daniel stared at him, stunned. "You saw the second apple. You saw the chemistry report. Someone else is involved." "I know," Harris replied, "but they're pressuring us. Hard." Shadow growled softly, sensing the tension. Daniel clenched his jaw. "A child is in danger. We can't ignore that." Harris rubbed his forehead. "Brooks, if you keep pushing, you could risk your position. Or worse." Daniel stepped back, the decision already forming inside him. "Then I'll do what I have to, with or without approval." Harris sighed, a sound filled with both fear and reluctant respect. "I had a feeling you'd say that." As Daniel turned to leave, Harris added quietly, "Be careful. Someone with influence wants this buried." Outside, Daniel walked briskly down the hall, Shadow matching his pace. His mind raced. Someone powerful was pulling strings. Someone who didn't want the truth about Ellie to surface. He reached the exit and paused, gripping the evidence folder tightly. If a system was trying to silence him, then the danger surrounding that little girl was far greater than any of them had realized. And Daniel Brooks had just become the one person standing in the way. 3 days later, the hospital felt a little less like a battlefield. Ellie was recovering, eating small meals, even coloring again. Mark stayed beside her every moment he could, though exhaustion clung to him like a second skin. He trusted no one except Officer Daniel and Shadow. But on that quiet Thursday afternoon, he had no choice. Work called, insisting he come in for a short shift. "I'll only be gone 2 hours," he promised Ellie. "Officer Brooks will check on you later." Ellie nodded bravely, even though fear flickered in her eyes. "Okay, Daddy." Mark kissed her forehead and left. An hour passed, then another. A nurse came by to check Ellie's vitals and paused. The bed was empty. The coloring book was on the floor, and Ellie's stuffed rabbit lay abandoned near the window. Panic rippled through the pediatric wing. Alarms sounded softly. Staff rushed from room to room and security was alerted. A nurse called Mark, who dropped everything and raced back to the hospital. Heart pounding so hard it felt like it might break through his ribs. Officers searched every hallway, every bathroom, every maintenance room. Nothing. When Daniel arrived with Shadow, he didn't wait for explanations. "Shadow, find her." The dog lowered his nose to the floor, sniffing Ellie's blanket, then took off down the corridor with a sharp, determined bark. Daniel followed closely, weaving past startled staff. Shadow led them out of the pediatric wing, through a side corridor, then straight to a fire exit door that was slightly ajar. Daniel pushed it open. Outside, cold wind swept across the empty back lot. A faint trail of small footprints appeared in the thin layer of dust. Ellie's hospital socks. But Shadow didn't follow the footprints. He veered left, nose to the concrete, pulling hard. Daniel realized with a jolt what that meant. Ellie didn't leave on her own. Shadow led them behind the building toward an old maintenance shed, long abandoned and half covered by overgrown shrubs. Daniel's pulse quickened. "Ellie! Ellie, can you hear me?" No response. Only the wind. Shadow whimpered once, pawing at the door. Daniel threw it open. And inside, in the dimness, Ellie sat on the cold floor, knees pulled to her chest, tears streaking her cheeks. "Officer Brooks," she whispered. She told me to stay here. She said Daddy didn't want me anymore. Daniel's heart twisted. You're safe now, sweetheart. I've got you. But as he carried her out, one chilling thought hit him. Janice was locked up. So who brought Ellie here? Daniel carried Ellie out of the shed, her small body trembling against his chest. Shadow stayed close, circling protectively as if expecting danger to leap from the shadows. When they reached the back lot, Mark sprinted toward them, breathless and panicked. The moment he saw Ellie, he collapsed to his knees and wrapped his arms around her. Sweetheart, my God, are you hurt? Are you okay? His voice cracked in places he couldn't hide. Ellie shook her head weakly. I'm okay, Daddy. Just cold. Mark held her tighter, as if he feared she might vanish again. Daniel placed a hand on his shoulder. We found her in the maintenance shed. Someone led her there deliberately. Mark stiffened. Someone, not Janice? Daniel shook his head grimly. Impossible. She's still in custody. Someone else took Ellie. Someone who had access to the hospital. A nurse rushed out with a blanket and wrapped Ellie gently. As they headed back inside, Ellie tugged on Daniel's sleeve. Officer Brooks? Yes, sweetheart? Ellie's voice was barely a whisper. The lady who took me. She wasn't mean. Not at first. She said she was here to help me. She told me Daddy was too busy and I should wait with her until he calmed down. Mark's face flooded with anguish. Ellie, I would never... I know, Ellie murmured, but she said you were tired of me. Daniel crouched beside her. Can you tell me anything else? What did she look like? Ellie hesitated, her brows knit together. She wore scrubs, blue ones like the nurses, and she smelled like flowers, but not nice flowers, too strong. Daniel exchanged a sharp look with the security officer. A fake nurse, a disguise, someone familiar enough with the hospital layout to move without suspicion. But then Ellie added one more detail, one that made Daniel freeze. She kept saying a name, like she was talking to someone who wasn't there. Mark leaned closer. What name, sweetheart? Ellie swallowed. She said, Tell Mason I'm doing my part. Daniel felt the air shift. Mason. The encrypted emails, the hidden transactions, the second apple. A name they hadn't been able to identify until a 6-year-old whispered it through chattering teeth. He stood slowly, urgency rising like fire in his chest. Mark, stay with Ellie. I need to contact my team immediately. Because for the first time, they had a real lead. And the person behind that name was no longer hiding in the dark. They were standing right inside the hospital. Mark held Ellie on the hospital bed long after Daniel rushed out. His hands shook as he stroked her hair, his mind replaying the awful realization. Someone else, someone inside the hospital, had been working with Janice, and Ellie, his little girl who blamed herself for everything, had been caught in the middle of a plan he didn't see coming. Ellie looked up at him timidly. Daddy, I didn't do anything wrong, right? Mark's throat tightened. No, sweetheart, you didn't do anything wrong. I should have protected you better. She leaned into him, relieved by his certainty, but guilt ate at Mark from the inside. He had brought Janice into their home. He had believed her when she said Ellie needed structure, that the child was overly sensitive, that Mark should trust her motherly instincts. Each memory now felt like a knife twisting deeper. A knock sounded at the door. A detective stepped in, holding a tablet. Mr. Harper, we pulled security footage from the past hour. You need to see this. Mark carefully laid Ellie back on the pillows and stepped into the hallway. The detective pressed play. A woman in blue scrubs walked calmly through the pediatric wing, face partially obscured by a surgical mask. Nothing unusual until she turned slightly toward the camera. Her badge was blurred, suspiciously smudged, and she avoided every camera angle that could show her clearly. But the moment she passed Ellie's room, her stride slowed, then stopped. Mark felt his stomach drop. She watched my daughter before taking her. Not just watched, the detective said softly. She timed it. She waited until the hallway was empty. This wasn't impulsive. Mark stared at the screen, fury rising in him like heat. Find her, please. Whoever she is, find her. Inside the room, Ellie reached for her stuffed rabbit, but her eyes drifted toward the window as though she feared the woman in scrubs might reappear. Then she whispered to herself, a whisper Mark caught as he stepped back inside. She said Mason will be happy. Who is Mason? Mark froze. Ellie, you heard that. She nodded. She said Mason was watching to make sure she did a good job. Mark's pulse pounded. Whoever Mason was, he wasn't just involved. He was orchestrating it. And at that exact moment, a nurse hurried down the hallway, calling out urgently to the staff. "We're missing one of our employees. She hasn't checked in all day. Someone named Marcy Dalton." Daniel, returning just in time to overhear, stopped cold. Marcy Dalton, a former nurse, fired 6 months ago. For working under a false identity, Daniel froze at the name Marcy Dalton, a former nurse dismissed for using false credentials. It wasn't just a coincidence. Someone like that didn't show up in a hospital again without a purpose. And now, with Ellie in the center of the storm, everything pointed to one direction. Marcy hadn't been acting alone. She had been acting for Mason. Mark stepped beside Daniel, eyes red with exhaustion and fear. "Is she the one who took Ellie?" "Most likely," Daniel said. "But Marcy Dalton isn't smart enough to coordinate something this layered on her own. Someone told her what to do. Someone who planned this long before Janice ever touched that apple." Mark swallowed hard. "Mason." Daniel nodded. Shadow, pacing anxiously, lifted his head and growled toward the hallway, as if he sensed something unseen moving around them. Daniel knelt beside him. "Easy, boy, we're going to find them." A detective rushed over, tablet in hand. "We pulled more footage. Marcy left the building 20 minutes before Ellie was found. But look, she wasn't alone." He tapped the screen. A man wearing a hoodie and baseball cap lingered at the loading dock, communicating with Marcy briefly before she slipped out the side door. The man looked up once, face still shadowed, but the build, the posture, the calmness. Daniel knew instantly. "That's Mason," he muttered. "You recognize him?" Mark asked. Daniel hesitated. "Not personally, but I've seen his type. Clean movements, careful posture, someone who knows how to disappear." "And how to manipulate people," Mark added bitterly. Detectives joined them in a small conference room, the whiteboard quickly filled with photos. Janice, Marcy, the hooded man, and emails printed from Janice's office. Evidence lines connected them like a growing web, one that pointed toward a much larger motive than jealousy or resentment. Mark gripped the table. "What do they want with my daughter?" Daniel inhaled slowly. "Based on Janice's debt records, leverage, insurance, control, someone wanted access to your assets, your accounts. And since Janice couldn't legally touch them without you, they targeted Ellie," Mark finished, horror dawning. "But we're not letting that happen again," Daniel said firmly. "Not anymore." For the first time, Mark saw something in Daniel's eyes. Unshakable determination, the kind that only comes from someone who refuses to lose a child again. The room fell silent as Daniel circled the last photo on the board, the hooded man. "Mason knows we're on to him." "Nridasa," Daniel said. "His next move will be fast." Mark looked at him. "So what do we do?" Daniel turned, resolve sharpening. "We set a trap." The plan came together in less than 24 hours, because Daniel knew one thing with absolute certainty. Mason would move quickly once he sensed the investigation closing in. The police needed a controlled environment, a public space with security, cameras, and no easy exits. And, as fate would have it, Dover's annual fall festival was happening that very weekend. An event Janice had adored and bragged about endlessly. Daniel studied the festival map with Mark beside him. Booths lined the main street, a live band rehearsed on stage. Children laughed near the pumpkin patch. On the surface, it looked harmless, but Mark saw something else beneath the cheerful decorations. The perfect place for someone like Mason to hide in plain sight. Ellie, though hesitant, agreed to go. She trusted Daniel and Shadow, and she understood, bravely, astonishingly, that if Mason wanted to take another chance, today was the day he'd reveal himself. Daniel kept her close, Shadow glued to her side, the dog's body tense with protective instinct. Crowds gathered. The scent of caramel apples drifted through the air. Ellie squeezed her father's hand. "Is she going to be here?" she whispered. "No," Mark said gently. "Janice is gone, sweetheart. She can't hurt you anymore." "But Mason can," Ellie murmured. Daniel knelt in front of her. "Not today. Today we're watching him." Officers in plain clothes blended into the festival crowd. Cameras had been repositioned. Every entrance and exit was monitored. Still, Daniel felt it. The prickling instinct that danger wasn't far. Then it happened. Shadow stopped walking. The dog's ears went rigid, nose lifting toward the breeze drifting from the vendor stalls. A low growl rumbled through him. Daniel followed his gaze toward the apple stand, a cheerful booth decorated with bright banners and baskets of polished fruit. For a moment the scene seemed innocent, but then Ellie whispered, barely audible, "That's the smell! The same smell from the woman who took me." Daniel's pulse kicked hard. The floral scent Ellie remembered, too sweet, too heavy, hung faintly near the stand. A woman in a knit hat browsed apples with unusual care, selecting them slowly, almost inspecting them. She glanced over her shoulder once, eyes scanning the festival, lingering just a heartbeat too long on Ellie. Daniel's muscles tensed. Mark grabbed Ellie protectively. Shadow barked, an explosive, unmistakable alarm. The woman dropped the apple, and from behind the booth, a man in a gray hoodie stepped out, the same build, the same posture as the figure from the camera footage. Mason. And he was looking directly at Ellie. For a heartbeat, the festival froze. Music faded, chatter died, and the world narrowed to a single moment. The man in the gray hoodie stepping out from behind the Apple booth, eyes locked on Ellie. His expression didn't twist or snarl. It stayed calm, too calm. The kind of calm that comes from someone who believes he has already won. Daniel instantly moved in front of Ellie, hand raised in a silent command for officers to tighten the perimeter. Shadow snarled, pulling at the leash, fur stiff and bristling. Mark held Ellie close, but she didn't cry. She only whispered, "That's him. That's Mason." Mason didn't run. He lifted his hands slowly as if greeting old friends. "Officer Brooks," he said, voice soft, smooth. "I was wondering when you'd catch on." Daniel stepped forward. "Put your hands where I can see them. Don't move." But Mason only smiled, eyes wandering to Ellie. "You caused a lot of trouble, little one. Janice wasn't supposed to panic. She always needed guidance." Mark lunged, but Daniel held him back. "Don't, he wants chaos." Then everything shifted in an instant. From the left side of the booth, the woman in the knit hat, a stranger just moments before, moved toward Mason with surprising urgency. Daniel raised his voice. "Ma'am, stay back." But she didn't step away. She stepped next to Mason and removed her hat. Ellie gasped. It was the same floral scent, the same woman who had taken her. Marcy Dalton. "Sorry," she said sweetly, almost mocking. "I'm not done helping yet." Mason nodded approvingly. "Good girl." Officers closed in, but Daniel recognized the danger. Not weapons, not force, manipulation. Mason worked in whispers, in loyalty built on fear, in the kind of control that convinced fragile people to do unthinkable things. "Ellie," Mason continued, taking a single step forward, "you remember what Janice told you? About your father being overwhelmed? About you being too much?" "Don't you talk to her," Mark shouted. Daniel held out an arm. "Mason, it's over. Step away now." Mason tilted his head. "No, it's just beginning." And then, right as officers moved to restrain him, Marcy suddenly grabbed a nearby basket of apples and hurled it downward, scattering fruit across the booth. The crowd panicked. Children screamed. People stumbled back. A perfect distraction. Mason bolted. "Go!" Daniel shouted. Shadow tore forward. Officers swarmed. Mark lifted Ellie into his arms. Because the trap had been set, but Mason had planned for one of his own. Shadow lunged through the scattering apples, weaving past overturned baskets and terrified festival-goers. Daniel sprinted behind him, adrenaline burning through his veins. Mason was fast, too fast, and he moved with purpose, slipping through the maze of booths like someone who had memorized every exit. But Shadow never lost the trail. His barks cut through the chaos like warning sirens. Behind them, officers tackled Marcy Dalton. She struggled wildly, shouting, "He told me what to do. I was helping. I was keeping the girl quiet." Her voice cracked into frantic sobs as handcuffs clicked around her wrists. The crowd recoiled, horrified. Mark held Ellie tightly against his chest, shielding her eyes. "Don't look, sweetheart. It's almost over." Ellie trembled. "Is Officer Brooks going to catch him?" Mark's voice shook, but his answer didn't. "He won't stop until he does." Ahead, Daniel pushed through the crowd as Shadow cornered Mason near the festival's outdoor stage. Mason skidded to a halt, breath visible in the cool air, the stage lights casting jagged shadows across his face. For the first time, Daniel saw fear flicker in his eyes. "Mason, it's over," Daniel shouted, closing the gap. "You're surrounded. Don't make this worse." Mason lifted his hands slowly, then smirked. "You have no idea what you've interfered with." Daniel didn't flinch. "I know enough. I know you coerced Janice. I know you manipulated Marcy, and I know you targeted a child." Mason's jaw tightened. "You think this was about the girl? Janice was desperate, weak, easy to bend. She needed money, fast. I gave her away. She just couldn't handle the pressure." Daniel took another step. Shadow growled inches from Mason's shoes. "You injected her with fear," Daniel said sharply, "just like Marcy." Mason shrugged. "People follow strength. Children—" His gaze shifted past Daniel toward Ellie in the distance. "They're just leverage." That was all Daniel needed to hear. 3 officers moved in simultaneously. Mason tried to twist away, but Shadow lunged, grabbing hold of his pant leg, not injuring, just stopping him cold. Officers tackled him to the ground. Mason fought back, but it was useless. The crowd erupted, not in fear anymore, but relief. Mark exhaled for the first time in hours. Ellie whispered, "He can't take me now, right?" Daniel walked back toward her, breath unsteady but relieved, Shadow trotting proudly beside him. "Not now," he said gently. "Not ever again." As Mason was hauled away, the web of lies he spun finally snapped. And for the first time, the town of Dover saw the truth. Janice wasn't the mastermind, but she chose her side. And now her entire world was crumbling with him. In the days following Mason's arrest, Dover felt different. Quieter, safer, as if the whole town had exhaled a breath it didn't know it was holding. The fall festival reopened the next day, but people walked through it more softly, their conversations hushed. They talked about bravery, about danger coming from unexpected places, and about the little girl who had survived what no child ever should. Ellie remained in the hospital for 2 more nights, not because her body needed healing, though rest was important, but because her heart did. Children are resilient, but resilience doesn't erase fear. It only grows around it. Mark slept on the reclining chair beside her bed, afraid to let her out of his sight again. Each time Ellie stirred, he woke instantly. Every time she whimpered in her sleep, he reached out, whispering, "Daddy's here, I'm not going anywhere." During the quiet morning hours, Daniel visited. Shadow padded calmly to Ellie's bedside, laying his head beside her hand. Ellie stroked his fur with a small smile. "He always finds me," she said softly. "That's his job," Daniel replied, "keeping people safe, especially you." Mark stood at the foot of the bed. "I don't know how to thank you. You saved her life, twice." Daniel shook his head. Ellie saved herself. She remembered details no adult could have remembered under pressure. That helped us find Mason. That helped bring all of this to light. Ellie looked up, shy but proud. "I wasn't brave all the time." Daniel smiled. "Brave doesn't mean never being scared. Brave means doing the right thing, even when you are scared." Mark's eyes softened. "She gets that from her mom." Silence followed, gentle, warm. Then Ellie reached out and took Daniel's hand. "Officer Brooks, will you still come visit when I go home?" Daniel blinked, caught off guard by the simple sincerity of her voice. "If it's okay with your dad, yeah, I'll be around." Mark nodded without hesitation. "You're family now, whether you like it or not." For a moment, the room felt full, like the kind of home Ellie used to dream about. Not perfect, not wealthy, but steady, safe, real. Outside, a nurse peeked in with news. Janice had finally been questioned. She confessed everything, from her debt to her desperation to her willingness to let Mason manipulate her. Her sentence would be severe. But Ellie didn't need to hear details. She only needed to know one thing. The people who loved her were still here. 2 weeks later, the courthouse steps in Dover were lined with reporters, officers, and residents who had followed every twist of Ellie Harper's story. Justice had moved quickly, faster than anyone expected, because the evidence against Janice Miller and Mason Cole was overwhelming. Their digital correspondence, financial records, tampered fruit, abduction attempt, and witness testimony formed a chain no lawyer could break. Inside the courtroom, Ellie sat between her father and Officer Daniel Brooks. Shadow rested at her feet, calm, steady, a silent reminder that she was protected. Ellie wore a small yellow dress, the same color her mother used to say made her look like sunshine. Today she needed that warmth. Janice stood at the defendant's table, pale and exhausted. Gone were the designer outfits and perfect hair. She looked smaller, shrunken by the weight of the truth she had tried so hard to escape. Across the room, Mason glared, hands cuffed, his confidence gone. He wasn't a mastermind anymore, he was just a criminal. When the judge read the verdicts, guilty on all counts, the courtroom erupted with whispers of relief. Janice's shoulders collapsed as the reality of her future settled in. Mason showed no emotion, but his silence spoke volumes. Their partnership in manipulation, control, and cruelty had ended here. Ellie squeezed her dad's hand. "It's really over?" she whispered. Mark nodded, tears in his eyes. "It's over, sweetheart." As they stepped outside, reporters called Mark's name, but he ignored them. He lifted Ellie into his arms, spinning her gently, laughing for the first time in months. Daniel approached with Shadow, giving them a warm smile. "You two look lighter." "We are," Mark said, "thanks to you." Ellie reached for Daniel's hand. "Are we still family?" Daniel knelt beside her. "If you want me to be." She nodded earnestly. "I do. Shadow, too." Shadow barked softly, tail thumping. In that moment, something shifted. Not dramatic, not loud, just real. A man who had carried his own grief for years. A father who had nearly lost the most important person in his world, and a child who had survived betrayal. They stood together, forming a family built not by blood, but by loyalty, courage, and second chances. As they walked toward the parking lot, Ellie leaned her head on Mark's shoulder. "I'm not a burden," she said quietly. Mark kissed her hair. "No, sweetheart, you're our miracle." And with Daniel walking beside them, Shadow guarding their steps, Ellie finally stepped into a life where love, not fear, waited for her. And just like that, our story comes to a close. But if you're still here with me right now, it means something in this journey has touched your heart in a way you didn't expect. Maybe it stirred a memory. Maybe it reminded you of your own strength. Or maybe it simply made you feel less alone. Stories like Ellie's show us something powerful. Even in the darkest moments, good people still exist. People who step in, who protect, who heal. The Stoics believed that the obstacle becomes the way. Ellie didn't choose what happened to her, but she chose to keep trusting, to keep hoping, to keep holding on. And that changed everything. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. We can't always control what hurts us, but we can choose who we become afterward. We can choose healing. We can choose courage. We can choose to build a life surrounded by those who truly care." So if this story reached you, if it made you think or feel or breathe a little deeper, hit the like button, share it with someone who might need its message, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories that lift, heal, and stay with you. We'll walk the next one together.